What is going on, Trash Talkers? We're back with another episode for you. In today's video, we're going to talk about the players on the roster bubble for each team in the NFC East. All that and much more coming your way right now! All right, Nick, as we continue this series, we're talking about the NFC East. Some big names and some big teams to really cover here. And I want to take a look starting off with the New York Giants. The Giants are one of those teams that made some vast upgrades this offseason, which could mean that some older veterans and key contributors to this team in the past may fall out of favor. And some of those newcomers may also not live up to the standard that they were brought in to be. So I take a look at the Giants, and players that I'm hearing that are on the roster bubble include wide receiver John Ross, left tackle Nate Solder, and cornerback Isaac Yiadom. Out of these three names, who do you think is the biggest surprise for the Giants on the roster bubble?
Without a doubt, the biggest surprise for me is going to be left tackle Nate Solder, a guy who's been an absolute beast since he entered the league. Nate Solder has been one of the better left tackles that you can find in pass protection, a guy that Daniel Jones has been around his entire career. Nate Solder was gone for one season, opted out last season with his own personal health issues and COVID. And then you have him returning, but then you have to realize they drafted Andrew Thomas last year in the first round, and he played left tackle last season for the Giants in Nate Solder's absence. Even though Andrew Thomas may not have had the best season, he's still improving. He was only a first-year player, and Nate Solder could definitely have his job in jeopardy if Andrew Thomas continues to improve off of last season. Nate Solder is over the age of 30. He's a guy who has suffered multiple injuries in his career and can never be counted on to be there the entire season. They might look towards a guy like Andrew Thomas to take over that left tackle position permanently, leaving Nate Solder on the outs for the Giants.
Next up, we have the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles have found themselves in a very precarious situation, as right now they are in a roster spot where they are looking like one of the worst teams, not only in their division, but in the NFL. They made some significant upgrades at key positions like wide receiver, but some would say that they had other opportunities that they missed in the draft, and honestly, they should have made more improvements. Now you take a look at some of the positions that they currently have, and some of these players have to go. Taking a look at the Eagles, you see players like running back Jordan Howard, wide receiver J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and safety Andrew Adams. Out of these, the biggest surprise to me is wide receiver J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. Arcega-Whiteside was one of those guys that was a real contributor for this Eagles team. He really worked in the slot well. He had a good rapport with Jalen Hurts and worked well in this offense, but the problem is that Devonta Smith now came into the fold. Devonta Smith, obviously the highly touted wide receiver coming out of Alabama, speedster, is going to really offset this team's wide receiving core really well, as Jalen Reagor and Travis Fulgham are going to come into the fold as the other 2 and 3 wide receivers that start for this team. You're looking on the outside, and Greg Ward Jr. and Quez Watkins have leapfrogged J.J. Arcega-Whiteside on the depth chart, leaving him as the possible 6th wide receiver on the depth chart. Not too many teams keep 6 wide receivers, so it looks like Arcega-Whiteside could end up being on the roster bubble as we move forward.
Next up, we have the Dallas Cowboys. Their biggest surprises so far in training camp have been defensive tackle Carlos Watkins, safety Jaron Kearse, and wide receiver Noah Brown. But I want to talk about their biggest surprise, Jaron Kearse. He's a big-bodied safety coming over from the Detroit Lions. He played there multiple seasons, and now you see that the Cowboys have brought on multiple safeties, Jaron Kearse being one of them, but the latest addition, Malik Hooker, being a massive addition and a guy that is threatening Jaron Kearse's ability to play for the Dallas Cowboys this season. Jaron Kearse has always been a pretty solid safety, but he just has never stood out, and he continues to stay that way in training camp. Malik Hooker is a guy with explosive athleticism, a guy who has dealt with injuries but has always had the talent, and that is starting to shine for the Dallas Cowboys, making Jaron Kearse the guy that is out of favor for the Dallas Cowboys and a guy that could potentially find himself as a free agent by the end of training camp.
Finally, we have the Washington football team. The Washington football team is one of those teams that won the division last year, but that was in spite of all the injuries that the Cowboys, the Eagles, and the Giants had, all the opt outs, and they kind of flopped their way to the finish line, essentially. This division was fully up for grabs, and a lot of changes have been made. Obviously, last year at this time, Dwayne Haskins was starting for the team, and Ron Rivera has made a change. Dwayne Haskins no longer on this roster, so we have Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm, and the Washington football team may continue to make some of those changes, taking a look at players like wide receiver Steve Sims Jr., offensive guard Ben Showell, and quarterback Kyle Allen. But I want to talk about Steve Sims Jr. Steve Sims Jr. is one of those guys that really contributed it in crunch time for the Washington football team last year. When Terry McLaurin went out with his injury, he really stepped up alongside Cam Sims. But the problem is that the Washington football team said, if Terry McLaurin's out, we want to make sure that we have a bona fide number one, or at least 1A, that can step up in his presence. So Terry McLaurin being on the roster, they went out and got Curtis Samuel, they drafted Diami Brown, and then they also brought in Adam Humphries. That's 4 deep at the wide receiver position, on top of the fact that they still have Cam Sims and DeAndre Carter, who have leapfrogged Steve Sims Jr. on this depth chart. I believe that Steve Sims Jr. has played himself out of Washington and should be looking at potential fits on other rosters in the coming weeks.
Yeah, Steve Sims was always a guy that, frankly, I always thought was Cam Sims, and I thought Cam Sims was Steve Sims, but it was always Cam Sims that was making the big plays for the Washington football team, and Steve Sims kind of just lingered in the background, never did much, and that's why when you see young guys like Diami Brown come on this roster and Adam Humphries come over, they leapfrog Steve Sims, and we see him falling. Like you said, Steve Sims is at the 6th or 7th wide receiver position, and frankly, most teams just don't carry that many wide receivers. I think Steve Sims has just had the opportunities available to him and has not taken advantage of them, which is why I could see Steve Sims miss the roster this season.
Absolutely. All right, I want to hear from you guys. Let us know in the comments down below which players we should keep our eyes on for the roster cuts. I want to see you guys getting active in the comments. I really want to pay attention to the NFC East because this is one of the tightest divisions that we have in football. All right, well, that'll be all for now. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. We go live every single day. That'll be all. Peace and love.